In the underworld of high-stakes power, a silent room is far more dangerous than a shouting match. They say you never truly know the person sitting across from you until the money is on the table and the exits are blocked. But sometimes, the deadliest weapon isn't a gun hidden in a jacket, it's a word spoken in the right language at the exact right second. This is the story of a college dropout who walked into a room full of killers, didn't say a word of English, and walked out owning the night. It's a tale of how a waitress didn't just serve a meal to a crime boss, she became the only person he could trust with his life. The year was 2024. The location was New York City, inside the velvet-roped sanctuary of Lorinary, Manhattan's most exclusive Italian establishment. This wasn't a spot for casual dinners. This was where senators shook hands with hedge fund managers over plates of food that cost more than a monthly rent check. The air usually smelled of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and old money. But on this particular Tuesday night, at 8:15 p.m., the air smelled distinctly like fear. Camilla Duca stood in the service station, adjusting her apron. She was 24 years old, invisible to the elite clientele, and drowning in student loan debt from an art history degree she never finished. Her feet throbbed in her sensible work shoes as she wiped a smudge of lipstick off a wine glass. To the owners of Lorinary, she was just another pair of hands delivering sparkling water. But tonight, she was about to become the most important person in the building. "Table 4 is a disaster waiting to happen," whispered Rick, the bartender. He slid a tray of Negronis toward her, his face pale. "Msai Laurent is sweating." "I have never seen Laurent sweat." Camilla glanced toward the private alcove in the back. Usually, this corner was reserved for Hollywood royalty or visiting diplomats. Tonight, the energy radiating from that section was heavy, dark, and suffocating. 6 men S.A. Tea at the round table. 5 of them were massive, with necks thick as tree trunks, wearing suits that strained at the shoulders. They were intimidating, but they weren't the problem. The problem was the man in the center. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a predator. He was perhaps 35, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him with architectural precision. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing a face that was handsome but brutally cold, like a statue carved from granite. He hadn't touched his bread. He hadn't looked at the menu. He was just staring at Msai Laurent, the general manager, with eyes that looked like dead coals. This was Lorenzo Enzo Valente. To food critics, the name meant nothing. To the FBI and the Italian Carabinieri, Enzo Valente was a ghost. He was the rumored new head of the Castelvetrano syndicate, a faction of the Sicilian Mafia that had supposedly gone legitimate in construction and waste management. Supposedly. "I don't understand, Sonora," Laurent stammered. The arrogant Frenchman, usually the tyrant of the dining room, was trembling. "We have the Barolo, the 2016. It is 98 points. Parker rated it." Enzo Valente didn't blink. He said something. It was low, guttural, and fast. It sounded like Italian, but it wasn't the melodic Italian taught in schools. It was chopped, aggressive, chewing on the vowels and spitting them out. Laurent looked helpless. He turned to the sommelier, a young man named Paolo from Milan. "Paolo, translate. What does he want?" Paolo looked terrified. I don't know, Msai. It sounds like dialect, but it's thick. Maybe Neapolitan or Calabrian." Enzo slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. The entire restaurant went silent. The diners at nearby tables, tech CEOs and models, froze, forks hovering halfway to their mouths. Enzo spoke again, louder this time. His voice was a weapon. He pointed a finger at Laurent, then at the bottle of expensive Barolo, and then made a sui. Ping, dismissive gesture that looked like he was swiping garbage off a ledge. One of the bodyguards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stood up. He reached inside his jacket. He didn't pull a gun. Not yet. But the implication was clear. The threat level in the room spiked from uncomfortable to lethal. "He is insulted," the bodyguard grunted in broken English. "You bring vinegar." You insult the Don. It is a $3,000 bottle. Laurent squeaked, his dignity vanishing. I don't understand. What does he want? Camila watched from the shadows of the service station. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She gripped her tray. She knew that sound. She knew that cadence. It wasn't just Italian. It wasn't Neapolitan. It was Sicilian. Specifically, the deep rural dialect of the Corleonese Mountains, the kind of language spoken by shepherds and ghosts in the hills south of Palermo. It was the language her nana used to scream in when she burned the sauce. The bodyguard took a step toward Laurent. Laurent backed into a service cart. The tension was a pulled rubber band 1 millimeter from snapping. If the bodyguard pulled a weapon, the panic would cause a stampede. People would get hurt. Camila didn't think. She didn't check with her supervisor. She set her tray down on the counter with a clatter. Camila, no, Rick hissed. Stay out of it. She ignored him. She walked across the plush carpet, the sound of her sensible work shoes swallowed by the noise of her own pulse. She walked right past the trembling sommelier, past the hyperventilating manager, and stopped directly in front of the table. The bodyguard blocked her path, his chest like a wall. Go away, girl. Camila didn't look at the bodyguard. She looked past him, directly into the dead coal eyes of Enzo Valente. Voja un Valento Francisi *, she said. Her voice shook slightly, then steadied. She dropped the American accent, her tongue finding the harsh rolling rhythm of her GR. And Mother's Village. You don't want the French-style wine. You want the blood of the earth. The old Nero d'Avola. The one that doesn't forget. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before, but it was different. Enzo Valente slowly tilted his head. The aggression didn't leave his face, but the confusion did. He looked at the waitress, at her messy bun, her cheap uniform, her defiant chin. He raised a hand, signaling the bodyguard to stand down. *Q**? Enzo asked softly. Who are you? Camila swallowed hard. The air around the table felt colder than the rest of the room. She was standing in the eye of a hurricane, and for the first time in his life, Msai Laurent was looking at her not as an employee, but as a life raft. Camila, she answered, keeping to the dialect. It felt strange on her tongue, rusty and ancient, like wearing a dress from the 1920s. My grandmother was from Corleone. She taught me that you don't offer a man from the mountains a wine made for the valleys. Enzo stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. His eyes scanned her face, looking for a lie, a wire, or a trap. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was the cessation of hostilities. He turned to Laurent, who was shaking like a leaf, and pointed at Camila. She stays, Enzo said in perfect unaccented English. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet wrapping a brick. You leave. Everyone leaves. Only her. Laurent didn't need to be told twice. Of course. Immediately. Camila, take care of Monsieur. He fled, dragging the confused sommelier with him. Now it was just Camila and the 6 men. The wine, Enzo said, switching back to the dialect. He was testing her. Do you have it? Or are you just talking pretty words to save your boss's skin? Camila nodded. We have a bottle in the cellar. It's not on the menu. The owner keeps it for himself. A 2001 Nero d'Avola from a small vineyard near Pacino. It's strong. It tastes like Blackbee. Rise and tar. Enzo leaned back, unbuttoning his suit jacket. Bring it. And bring me a clean glass. This one smells like detergent. Camila rushed to the cellar. Her hands were trembling so badly she almost dropped the key. She found the bottle, dusty and forgotten in the owner's private reserve. She grabbed a crystal glass, polishing it frantically with a linen cloth until it sparkled. When she returned, the mood at the table had shifted. The tension remained, but the threat of immediate violence had dissipated. The men were watching her with curiosity. She presented the bottle. She didn't do the fancy sommelier routine. She simply uncorked it, poured a small amount, and waited. Enzo lifted the glass. He swirled the dark, almost black liquid. He inhaled deeply. He took a sip. He closed his eyes. For a second, the mask of the ruthless businessman slipped, revealing a man who was tired. A man who missed a home he could probably never return to. *Ben**, he murmured. Good. He gestured to the empty chair next to him. Sit. Camila froze. Sir, I can't. It's against policy. I could get fired. Enzo looked at her. If they fire you, I will buy this building and hire you back as the owner. Sit. Camila sat. For the next hour, the dynamic of Lorinary was turned upside down. The other servers watched in shock from the kitchen doorway as the quiet waitress sat at the head table with the city's most dangerous guests. Enzo didn't flirt, he interrogated. You speak the old tongue, he said, cutting into a steak that Camila had personally ensured was cooked rare. But you were born here in America. Queens, Camila said. Astoria. Why did your family leave? My grandfather owed money, Camila said honestly. Lying to a man like this seemed pointless. He would smell it. He left in the 70s. He never went back. My nana refused to speak English in the house. She said English was a language for business, but Sicilian was for family. Enzo nodded slowly. Your nana W. As a wise woman. What about you? You work here serving arrogant Frenchmen. Is this your dream? No, Camila said, looking down at the tablecloth. I studied art history. I wanted to be a curator. But life happens. My dad got sick. Medical bills. I dropped out. Money, Enzo said, a cynical edge to his voice. It always comes down to money. It is the only language everyone speaks fluently. He poured wine into a glass. She hesitated. Drink, he commanded softly. It is a sin to drink alone. She took a sip. It was rich, heavy, and delicious. You have a sharp mind, Camila, Enzo said, his eyes locking onto hers. You read the room. You saw the danger. You acted. Most people freeze. You didn't. I was scared, she admitted. Fear is good. Fear keeps you alive. It's the lack of fear that gets men killed. He signaled for the check. When the bill came, over $4,000, Enzo didn't look at it. He threw a heavy black American Express card on the tray. As he stood up to leave, the restaurant seemed to exhale. The bodyguards fell into formation around him. Enzo buttoned his jacket, becoming the statue again. He stopped beside Camila's chair. He leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood, tobacco, and cold air. You saved your manager a trip to the hospital tonight, he whispered. I don't forget favors, and I don't forget faces. He walked out. Camila sat there, stunned. She looked down at the credit card receipt he had left on the table. In the tip line, he hadn't written a percentage. He had written a number, $5,000. And below it, a phone number. The next morning, Camila's life didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like a hangover. She woke up in her cramped apartment in Astoria, the sound of the elevated train rattling her windows. The night before felt like a hallucination, except for the receipt she had folded into her pocket. $5,000. That was 3 months of rent. That was a chunk of her student loans. It was freedom. But the phone number burned a hole in her mind. She went to work. The atmosphere at Lorinary had changed. Messiah Laurent treated her with a bizarre mix of reverence and suspicion. He didn't yell at her for being 5 minutes late. He actually brought her a coffee. He asked for you, Laurent said, his voice tight. Camila froze near the coffee machine. Who? Sonora Valente. His assistant called. He has a reservation for tonight, 8 p.m. He specified that you are to be his exclusive server. You are not to take other tables. Camila felt a chill run down her spine. I can't. Tonight is my brother's birthday. I requested to leave early. Laurent looked at her as if she were insane. Camila, you don't say no to Enzo Valente. If you leave, don't come back. She was trapped. At 8 p.m. sharp, Enzo arrived. This time, he was alone, save for two bodyguards who stood by the entrance, scanning the room like Secret Service agents. He sat at the same table. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, though his suit was impeccable, a navy blue that probably cost more than her father's life insurance payout. You came, he said as she approached. I work here, she replied, trying to keep her tone professional. And you requested me. I did. He looked at the menu, but didn't read it. I hate eating alone. It makes the food taste like ash. Sit. Sir, last night was an exception. The manager has been paid a very generous consulting fee to look the other way, Enzo cut in. Sit. She sat. This time the conversation was different. It wasn't about her past. It was about his present. He started speaking in the dialect again, as if testing her endurance. He talked about contractors who were failing to deliver concrete. He talked about local unions that were squeezing him. He spoke in code, but Camila had grown up listening to her uncle's whispers in the kitchen. She knew that concrete meant territory, and unions ain't rival families. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly after he had vented about a shipment from New Jersey. I'm a waitress. I could go to the police. Enzo laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The police? Half the precinct is on my payroll, and the other half is trying to build a RICO case that will take 10 years. You won't go to the police, Camila. Why not? Because you need money. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. Camila opened it, her breath hitching. It was a file on her brother, Leo. Leo was 22, a gambling addict who thought he was a poker pro. The file contained photos of Leo entering an underground casino in Brooklyn. It contained copies of IOUs. Your brother owes $40,000 to the Rossi family, Enzo said calmly. The Rossis are untidy. They don't send debt collectors. They send surgeons with baseball bats. Camila felt the blood drain from her face. She slammed the folder shut. What do you want? Are you threatening him? No, Enzo said. I'm offering a trade. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I need a translator. Not for menus. For meetings. You speak English perfectly. I do. But the men I deal with, the old guard from Calabria, the envoys from Palermo, they speak in riddles. They speak in proverbs. I need someone who understands the culture, not just the words. I need someone who can hear what they aren't saying. I need someone invisible. A woman, a waitress pouring coffee while the men talk business. You want me to spy for you, she whispered. I want you to be my ears. In exchange, I buy your brother's debt. I clear it. He walks away free. And I pay you $10,000 a month. Camila looked at the man. He was dangerous. He was a criminal. It was everything her nana warned her about. But looking at the photos of Leo, she knew she had no choice. The Rossis would kill him. When do I start? She asked. Enzo smiled. This time it reached his eyes. It was a terrifying, charming smile. Right now, he said. Finish your wine. We have a meeting in Little Italy at midnight. And Camila? Take off the apron. You don't serve the food anymore. You serve the family. The midnight meeting took place in the back room of a bakery on Grand Street that had been officially closed since 1998. The windows were painted over, and the air inside smelled of stale flour, espresso, and high-grade cigars. Camila sat to Enzo's right. She was no longer wearing her polyester uniform. Enzo had sent a stylist to her apartment 2 hours before the meeting. She now wore a black silk blouse, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked ominously on the linoleum floor. She looked like a lawyer or a hitman's wife. She felt like an imposter. Across the table sat Don Salvatore, a man who looked like a kindly grandfather until you saw his hands. They were covered in liver spots and scars, resting on the head of a silver cane. He was flanked by 2 nephews, aggressive men in leather jackets who kept staring at Camila's throat. Don Salvatore welcomes you, Camila translated, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. He says the weather has been cold for this time of year. Enzo didn't look at Salvatore. He looked at his fingernails. Tell him I didn't come here to discuss meteorology. Tell him I came for the shipping containers in Newark. Camila switched to the heavy Calabrian dialect Salvatore was using, a distinct shift from the Sicilian she used with Enzo. Asterisk non simu tempo voluntara starda. Salvatore smiled, revealing yellow teeth. He began to speak, his voice a low rumble. He spoke of family, of tradition, of how the fruit in the containers was fresh, but the customs officers were hungry. Camila listened, her brain working in overdrive. It wasn't just translation. It was decoding. Fruit meant cocaine. Customs officers meant bribes. But there was something else. Salvatore kept using a specific phrase, l'amico de l'orto. The friend from the garden. In standard Italian, it sounded innocent. But in the specific dialect of the Aspromonte Mountains, where Salvatore was born, the friend from the garden was an old code for a betrayer, a snake. Camila froze. She looked at the nephews. They were shifting their weight. One of them had his hand near his belt, not on a holster, but near a small remote trigger on the table. What did he say? Enzo asked, his voice low. Camila leaned in, pretending to pour Enzo a glass of water. Her lips brushed his ear. He's lying, she whispered. He keeps referencing a friend in the garden. In his village, that means a trap. He's not selling you the route. He's selling you to the feds. The hungry customs officers aren't looking for bribes. They're waiting outside. Enzo didn't flinch. He didn't look at the door. He didn't look at the nephews. Are you sure? He murmured. I remember my grandfather telling stories about the war in the mountains, she whispered back. The friend in the garden is who you killed before he bites you. Enzo nodded, a microscopic movement. He stood up abruptly. The chair screeched against the floor. Salvatore's nephews jumped, hands going to their weapons. My apologies, Don Salvatore, Enzo said in English, his voice booming. My assistant just reminded me of a pressing engagement. It seems the fruit is too ripe for my taste. Salvatore's eyes narrowed. You leave now. You insult me, Valente. Better to be insulted than incarcerated, Enzo replied, cold as ice. He grabbed Camila's arm hard and pulled her towards the back exit, not the front door they had entered through. Move. Now. As they burst into the alleyway, the front of the bakery exploded with light and noise. Federal agents. Nobody move. The raid. They were already moving down the alley, Enzo shielding Camila with his body as they sprinted toward a waiting black SUV. They dove into the back seat just as the driver gunned the engine, tires screaming against the wet asphalt. Inside the car, the sigh. NCE was deafening. Camila was hyperventilating. She had just been in the middle of a federal sting. Enzo looked at her. The street lights flickered over his face, illuminating the sharp angles of his jaw. He looked at her not as a tool, but with a terrifying intensity. You were right, he said. They were going to arrest you, she gasped. Or kill me. Salvatore plays both sides. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, his grip possessive. You have a good ear, Camila. A very good ear. I want to go home, she said, her voice trembling. I can't do this. I'm an art history major. I serve pasta. I don't run from the FBI. Enzo pulled her closer. The space between them vanished. The smell of danger and sandalwood overwhelmed her. You aren't a waitress anymore, he said, his thumb grazing her pulse point. You are the only person in this city I can trust. You are mine now, Camila. And I take care of what is mine. He didn't kiss her. He did something more intimate. He took the pins out of her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders, claiming her transformation. Driver, Enzo commanded. Take us to the penthouse. She's not going back to Astoria tonight. 3 months passed. Camila Duca had effectively vanished. In her place stood a woman who wore Prada-like armor and spoke 4 dialects of Italian with the precision of a diplomat. She lived in a guest suite in Enzo's sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. Her student loans were paid. Her brother Leo was in a luxury rehab facility in Arizona, fully funded by an anonymous grant. She had everything she had ever worried about losing: security, money, status. But she was a prisoner. The penthouse was a fortress. The elevator required a retinal scan. 2 guards, Marco and Luca, were always at the door. Enzo was a phantom, appearing for dinner, dragging her to high-stakes meetings, and then disappearing into his study to make calls that ended lives. The romance between them was a slow burn. Fuse. It was in the way he touched the small of her back as he guided her through crowded ballrooms. It was in the way he watched her eat as if he were starving. But he never crossed the line. He kept a wall of glass between them, protection, or perhaps fear that if he touched her, he would ruin her. One rainy Tuesday, the glass wall cracked. Enzo returned home early. He was bleeding. Camila was in the library reading a book on Renaissance architecture when the elevator chimed. Enzo stumbled out, gripping his side. His white shirt was stained with a blooming red flower just above the hip. Enzo. She dropped the book and ran to him. It's nothing, he grunted, leaning heavily against the wall. A grazing shot. Just a warning from the Russians. We need a doctor, she panicked, reaching for her phone. No doctors, he snarled, knocking the phone from her hand. No hospitals. The police monitor gunshot reports. You do it. Me? I'm not a nurse. You have hands. You have vodka. You have thread. Fix it. He collapsed onto the leather sofa. Camila didn't have time to argue. She ran to the bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Her hands shook as she cut away his shirt. The wound was ugly, a deep gash where the bullet had torn through the muscle but missed the bone. Enzo groaned through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. This is going to hurt, she said, tears pricking her eyes. Talk to me, he gasped. Distract me. Speak. Speak the dialect. Camila cleaned the wound, pouring alcohol over it. Enzo hissed, his back arching off the sofa. She threaded the needle. Asterisk luda kuamari asterisk, she whispered, reciting an old poem her nana used to say. Pain is like the sea. Vinva matra. It comes and goes, but the stone remains. She stitched him up. It took 20 minutes of torture for both of them. When she tied the final knot and taped the gauze, she was sweating as much as he was. Enzo lay back, pale, but breathing steadily. He looked at her, his eyes hazy with pain and adrenaline. You possess hands of gold, he whispered in Sicilian. You're an idiot, she replied in English, wiping blood from her hands with a towel. You could have died. For what? More concrete? More money? For power, he said. So that no one can ever tell me what to do again. So that no one can hurt the people I keep. He reached out, grabbing her wrist. He pulled her down. This time there was no resistance. Camila, he breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It tasted of blood, whiskey, and desperation. It was a kiss that sealed a pact. She wasn't just his employee anymore. She was High's accomplice. She was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. She kissed him back, tangling her fingers in his dark hair, forgetting the danger, forgetting the FBI, forgetting that he was a monster. In that moment, he was just a man who needed her. But the bubble burst the next morning. Camila went to the local market, one of the few freedoms she was allowed, provided Marco trailed her 10 paces behind. She was buying oranges when a man in a trench coat bumped into her. "Excuse me," she said. "Hello, Camila," the man said. He didn't move. She looked up. He was in his 40s with a face that looked like it had been punched too many times. He flashed a badge. "Detective Holloway, NYPD Organized Crime Task Force." Camila's blood ran cold. She glanced back. Marco was distracted, looking at a girl by the flower stand. "I have nothing to say to you," she whispered, turning to leave. "We know about Arizona," Holloway said. Camila stopped. "Leo Duca. Sunny disposition. Expensive rehab. 50,000 a month paid for by a shell company traced back to Valente Construction." Holloway stepped closer. "We're building a RICO case, Camila. We have the wiretaps from the bakery. We know you were there. That makes you an accessory to conspiracy. That's 15 years in federal prison." I'm just a translator," she stammered. "And Leo is just a junkie," Holloway said cruelly. "Here's the deal. You are going to wear a wire. You're going to get Valente on tape admitting to the murder of the union boss last July. You do that, you and Leo walk away. Witness protection. New names. And if I don't, then we raid the rehab center. We find drugs in Leo's room. We'll make sure they're there. He goes to prison. You go to prison. And Valente?" Holloway smiled. "Men like Valente don't leave witnesses. When he's done with you, you'll just be another loose end." He slipped a card into a grocery bag. "You have 48 hours. Think about your brother." Camila walked back to the penthouse in a daze. Marco held the door for her, smiling. "Good oranges, Signorina." She looked at him, then at the penthouse that had become her home. She looked at Enzo, who was waiting for her on the balcony, healed enough to stand, holding 2 glasses of wine. He looked at her with a warmth she had never seen before. "I missed you," he said. Camila felt the weight of the detective's card in her bag like a lead brick. She was standing on a trap door, and the lever was about to be pulled. The tension in the penthouse was palpable for the next 2 days. Camila barely ate. She jumped every time her phone buzzed. Enzo noticed. He was a man who noticed everything. "You are quiet," he said over dinner. "Is it Leo?" "No," she lied. "Just a headache." "I have a surprise for you," he said. "Tonight is the Feast of San Gennaro. We are going to the festival in Little Italy. It is public. It is loud. It is safe." "Is it safe?" she asked, looking at him. "With me, always." They took the armored limousine. Little Italy was a chaotic sea of red, white, and green lights. The smell of frying zeppole and sausage peppers filled the air. Thousands of people thronged the streets. For an hour, they pretended to be normal. Enzo bought her a cannoli. They played a rigged carnival game where Enzo intimidated the carny into giving her a giant teddy bear. They walked hand in hand, surrounded by bodyguards who formed a flying wedge through the crowd. But the night wasn't just for fun. It was a summit. They entered Il Cortal, a famous restaurant that had been cleared of all other patrons. The back garden was filled with the heads of the 5 families. It was a peace treaty meeting, a gathering to divide the territories of the recently deceased Don Salvatore. This was the moment Holloway wanted. This was the meeting where they would discuss the murders, the rackets, the concrete. If she was wearing a wire, she could take them all down. She wasn't wearing a wire. She had flushed Holloway's C.R. down the toilet. She sat beside Enzo. The air was thick with smoke and testosterone. Across the table sat a man Camila hadn't met before. This was Matteo the butcher, Moretti. He was young, flashy, and hated Enzo. Valente brings his pet, Moretti sneered, speaking in English. Does she do tricks? Enzo's hand tightened on his wine glass. She speaks better Italian than you, Matteo. And she has more honor. Honor? Moretti laughed. We hear rumors, Enzo. We hear you are going soft. We hear you are clearing debts for junkies in Arizona. Camila froze. How did he know? Enzo's face went blank. Careful, Matteo. I am careful, Moretti said. He switched to a dialect. It wasn't Sicilian. It wasn't Calabrian. It was a strange clipped slang used by the Camorra of Naples. Asterisk you lupu dormi capacura asterisk, Moretti said to his associate on the left, grinning. The wolf sleeps with the sheep. Then he added something else, faster, lower. Asterisk stasero star dot. Camila's mind raced. She parsed the vowels. She analyzed the syntax. Stack. Fireworks. Ulupi. The wolf dies. Tonight, when the fireworks start, the wolf dies. Moretti smiled at Enzo, raising his glass in a toast. To peace. Enzo reached for his glass. No. Camila screamed. She slapped the glass out of Enzo's hand. Red wine shattered across the white tablecloth, staining it like blood. The room erupted. Guns were drawn instantly. 10 men stood up, chairs crashing. She's crazy. Moretti shouted. She attacked the Don. He's going to kill you. Camila screamed at Enzo, grabbing his lapels. When the fireworks start, the wine isn't the poison. The timing is. It's an ambush. Enzo looked at her. He looked at Moretti. At that exact moment, the first firework from the festival exploded overhead with a massive boom. Simultaneously, the waiter standing behind Enzo, a man who had been refilling water glasses, dropped a pitcher and pulled a suppressed pistol from his waistband. The noise of the firework masked the sound of the slide rack. But Enzo was already moving. He had trusted Camila's translation. He shoved the table forward, pinning Moretti against the wall. He spun, grabbing the waiter's wrist just as the gun fired. Foot, the bullet meant for Enzo's brain shattered a mirror behind him. Chaos ensued. Enzo's bodyguards opened fire. The garden turned into a war zone. Get down. Enzo roared, throwing Camila to the floor and covering her. Debris rained down on them. We have to go. Marco yelled, firing back at Moretti's men. Enzo dragged Camila up. They sprinted through the kitchen, dodging cooks and flying plates. They burst out into the crowded street of the festival. The crowd was cheering at the fireworks, completely unaware that a massacre was happening 50 feet away. Well, we can't use the car, Enzo shouted over the noise of the explosions. They'll have the street blocked. We need to disappear. Where? Camila cried. They know where you live. Enzo looked at her. He was breathless, his suit torn, his eyes wild. Not my place. Yours? My apartment? Astoria? Nobody knows you exist anymore. It's the last place they will look. They ran into the subway station, blending into the crowd of tourists leaving the festival. The boss of the Sicilian Mafia and his translator huddled together on the end train, fleeing for their lives. As the train rattled under the East River, Enzo looked at Camila. He didn't say thank you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. It's done, he said into the phone. Moretti turned. Burn it all down. Start with his warehouses. He hung up and looked at Camila. You saved me again, he said softly. You cleared my brother's debt. We're even, she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder, exhausted. No, Enzo said, his voice dark. We are not even. We are just getting started. But Camila knew something Enzo didn't. As the train pulled into Queens, she saw a man in a beige coat standing at the far end of the car reading a newspaper. It was Detective Holloway, and he was smiling. The end train screeched, metal grinding against metal, the lights flickering in epileptic rhythm as the car rocked violently. To the tourists, it was just the subway. To Camila, it was a steel coffin moving at 40 miles per hour. Detective Holloway stood at the end of the car. He didn't draw a weapon. Not here. Not with civilians watching. He simply stared. A predatory smirk plastered on his face, holding a folded newspaper that concealed his right hand. Enzo saw him. The recognition was instant. A chemical shift in the air. Enzo's hand went to his waistband, but he stopped. He was wounded, bleeding sluggishly through his dress shirt, and he had no weapon. He had left his gun on the floor of the restaurant garden. He's here, Enzo whispered, his lips barely moving. Don't look. I saw him, Camila breathed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What do we do? At the next stop, Queensboro Plaza. The doors open on both sides, Enzo murmured. When they open, I go left. You go right. You run. You don't look back. You disappear. No, Camila said, gripping his arm. The silk of his ruined suit was damp with sweat. He's not alone. Look at the man by the sliding doors and the one pretending to sleep near the conductor. They're boxing us in. Enzo scanned the car. She was right. It was a kill box. Holloway hadn't come to arrest them. He had come to herd them. Smart girl, Enzo said, a grim smile touching his lips. Then we don't wait for the station. Enzo stood up. He reached up to the red emergency handle labeled "Do Not Pull." Hold on, he commanded. He yanked the handle down with all his strength. The brakes engaged with a deafening scream. The train didn't just stop. It shuddered as if it had hit a wall. Passengers were thrown forward. Tourists screamed. Luggage flew across the car. In the chaos, the lights died completely. Go! Enzo roared. He didn't go for the doors. He kicked out the window of the conductor's cab at the end of the car, shattering the glass. He grabbed Camila by the waist and hoisted her through the jagged opening, out onto the narrow, terrifying catwalk of the subway tunnel. They hit the cold concrete hard. The tunnel was pitch black, smelling of ozone, garbage, and ancient dust. To their left, the electrified third rail hummed with lethal voltage. Move! Enzo grunted, dragging her up. They ran. They ran through the darkness, guided only by the distant lights of the station ahead and the adrenaline flooding their veins. Behind them, they heard shouts. A flashlight beam sliced through the dark, missing them by inches. Stop! Holloway's voice echoed off the tunnel walls, distorted and demonic. You can't outrun the NYPD, Valente. He's not NYPD tonight, Enzo rasped, limping heavily. He's freelance. They reached an emergency maintenance ladder leading up to a street grate. Enzo shoved Camila up first. She pushed the heavy iron grate aside, gasping as the cool night air of Queens hit her face. They scrambled out into an alleyway in Long Island City, miles from the safety of her apartment, but out of the trap. My leg, Enzo groaned, collapsing against a dumpster. The run had torn his stitches open. The side of his shirt was soaked black. We need a car, Camila said, frantic. We need to get to Astoria. No, Enzo wheezed. Astoria is burned. They know you. They know your address. Then where? Enzo looked at her, his eyes glazing over. The only place where the wolves won't go. He passed out. The sanctuary. Camila didn't call an ambulance. She didn't call a taxi. She stole. She found a delivery van idling outside a bodega, the driver inside buying cigarettes. She helped Enzo into the passenger seat, jumped behind the wheel, and drove. She drove with the cold precision Enzo had taught her. She didn't go to Astoria. She drove deep into the boroughs, past the gentrified neighborhoods, into the forgotten industrial zones of the Bronx. She drove to a place she hadn't visited in 10 years, the Church of San Miguel. It was a crumbling brick church where her grandfather had been a deacon. The priest, Father Thomas, was 90 years old and half blind, but he owed the Duca family a debt that spanned 3 generations. She pounded on the rectory door at 2 a.m. When Father Thomas opened it, confusing them for ghosts, Camila spoke in the dialect. Asterisk Padre, Avamu Sangu. Avamu Bisognu di Sanctuary, asterisk Father, we have blood. We need sanctuary. Blood calls to blood. They hid Enzo in the cellar on a cot usually reserved for the homeless. For 3 days, the world outside burned. The news reported a gangland shootout in Little Italy and a manhunt for Enzo Valente. The FBI froze his assets. The Valente crime family was in chaos, with captains fighting for the throne, assuming the boss was dead. Camila became his nurse again. She fed him soup made from the priest's meager pantry. She changed his bandages. She slept on a chair beside him, holding his hand. In the silence of the cellar, stripped of his suits, his money, and his power, Enzo Valente changed. The armor fell away. Why? He asked on the 3rd night. The fever had broken. He was sitting up, weak, but lucid. You could have left me in the tunnel. You could have made a deal with Holloway. I don't make deals with traitors, Camila said, peeling an apple with a paring knife. I ruined your life, Enzo said quietly. You were an art student. Now you are a fugitive driving a stolen van. My life was boring, she said, handing him a slice of apple. I was invisible. You saw me. Enzo looked at her. The basement light cast long shadows across his face. I didn't just see you, Camila. I heard you. You are the only one who speaks the truth to me. He reached into his pocket, the only thing he had saved from the suit. It was a small, heavy signet ring, the crest of the Castelvetrano clan. If I die, he said, pressing it into her palm. You take this to my cousin in Palermo. He will protect you. He will give you a new life. You aren't going to die, she said, closing his fingers over the ring. Because we are going to take it back. Take what back? Everything. The resurrection. On the 5th day, Camila made a phone call. She didn't call Enzo's lieutenants. They were likely compromised. She called the number on the back of the business card Matteo Moretti had thrown on the table, the number of the rival boss. She set a meeting, not in a dark alley, but in the most public place imaginable, Grand Central Terminal, under the clock at rush hour. Enzo was against it. It's suicide, he argued, trying to stand up. No, Camila said, fixing his tie, a cheap one she had bought at a thrift store. It's politics. You taught me to read the room. Now, let me speak. They arrived at Grand Central at 5 p.m. The station was a hive of commuters. Standing under the golden clock was Matteo Moretti, looking smug, flanked by 4 bodyguards and Detective Holloway. Enzo walked up to him. He looked battered. He was limping, but he wore his injuries like medals. The crowd parted around them, sensing the violence radiating from the 2 men. You're alive, Moretti laughed. I'm disappointed. I was planning your funeral. I picked out lovely flowers. You missed, Enzo said dryly. I won't miss this time, Holloway whispered, his hand drifting to his holster. Detective, Camila's voice cut through the noise. She stepped out from behind Enzo. She looked small, harmless. Before you shoot, you should know what I sent to the district attorney this morning. Holloway froze. You're bluffing. Am I? Camila switched to English, loud and clear. I have the ledger. The one from the Newark shipping containers. The one that lists the badge numbers of every cop on the Moretti payroll. Moretti's eyes narrowed. She's lying. Kill them. Wait, Holloway said, panic flickering in his eyes. I didn't just send it to the DA, see? Amila continued, her voice gaining strength. I sent a copy to the commission. The word hung in the air. The commission. The governing body of the 5 families, the old guard who despised unnecessary noise and hated rats even more. Camila turned her gaze to Moretti's bodyguards. She recognized them. They weren't Neapolitan like Moretti. They were old-school Sicilians, hired muscle. She spoke to them in the dialect. Asterisk Gardaloo asterisk, she said, pointing at Moretti. Look at him. He stands with a policeman. He breaks the omerta. He invites the law into our house. Since when do men of honor take orders from a cop? The bodyguards shifted. They looked at Moretti, then at Holloway. The cultural taboo of a boss working openly with a police detective was a stain that couldn't be washed away. She's witching you. Moretti screamed. Shoot her. He calls me a witch because I speak the truth, Camila said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The fish stinks from the head. The lead bodyguard, a giant man with a scar, looked at Moretti. He saw the fear in the boss's eyes. He saw the partnership with Holloway. The bodyguard took a step back. He folded his arms. We do not serve rats, the bodyguard grunted in Italian. Moretti's face went white. He was alone. Holloway. Moretti screamed. Do something. Holloway pulled his gun. But Enzo was faster. Despite his wound, he lunged. He didn't use a fist. He used a fountain pen. A Mont Blanc he had taken from his pocket. He drove it into Holloway's shoulder, hitting the nerve cluster. Holloway screamed and dropped the gun. Enzo kicked the weapon away. He stood over the detective and the rival boss. It's over, Matteo. The commission will decide your fate, but I suspect your retirement will be permanent. He turned to Camila. He didn't care about the hundreds of commuters watching or the sirens wailing in the distance as the real police finally arrived to clean up the mess. He took her face in his hands. You, he whispered. You are the boss now. No, she smiled, leaning into his touch. I'm just the translator. 6 months later, the restaurant Lorinary was closed for a private event. The table in the back was set for 2. A bottle of 2001 Nero di Avola sat breathing on the white cloth. Camila sat at the head of the table. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen. Enzo sat to her right. He was fully healed, though he walked with a slight limp, a reminder of the night the wolf almost died. The waiter approached, a nervous young man who was shaking as he held the wine list. Signora, he stammered. We have the Chianti. Enzo looked at the boy. He looked at the fear in his eyes. Enzo smiled. It was a genuine smile. Relax, kid. We don't bite unless the wine is corked. Camila laughed. She reached out and covered Enzo's hand with hers. Her brother Leo was clean and running a legitimate bakery in Jersey. Her student loans were a memory. And she was no longer invisible. She was the consigliere, the voice that whispered in the ear of the king. To the language of ghosts, Enzo toasted, raising his glass. To the friends in the garden, Camila replied, clinking her glass against his. They drank. The wine tasted of blackberries, tar, and survival. Outside, the city of New York moved on, oblivious to the monsters and monarchs dining in their midst. But inside, everything was understood. No words were needed. In a world where silence is golden and words can be lethal, Camila Duca proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's understanding. She didn't just translate a language. She translated the soul of a man who had forgotten he had one. From the humble tables of a Manhattan restaurant to the terrifying tunnels of the subway, her journey teaches us that power isn't about who shouts the loudest, but who knows what is truly being said. Enzo Valente was the boss, but Camila became the architect of their survival. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? If you enjoyed this tale of mafia suspense, forbidden romance, and the power of language, please like this video. It helps us tell more stories like this. Share it with a friend who loves a good twist. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter of our audio dramas. What do you think happened to Detective Holloway? Let me know in the comments below.